This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. Probably one of my earliest memories of when I was a kid of watching a movie, and I probably should not have been allowed to see it, was the original Bonnie and Clyde movie with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. Now, we have done an episode of Body Bags on Bonnie and Clyde. It was done within the last few months, I think. If you get a chance, go back and check that out. But it's not Warren Beatty that really sticks in my mind, or certainly Faye Dunaway. It's probably Gene Hackman. And one of the reasons I enjoyed it, it was one of his early roles. And he was so genuine. You know, Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty are so polished. It's like they are hermetically sealed and kind of broken out. But Gene Hackman was great in that movie. And boy, was it bloody, because if I remember correctly, I think it was a Sam Peckinpah movie. I might be wrong about that. I can't remember. But today, we're going to talk about the death of, in my estimation, one of two of the greatest actors, the other one being Robert Duvall, and Gene Hackman. But Gene Hackman was found deceased recently in his home, along with his wife, Betsy. And of course, there was a pet dog. He loved German Shepherds that was found deceased as well. But we're going to talk about this because there's been a lot rumblings in the news about his death, and all kinds of things have been thrown about with people speculating. To be speculating as a death investigator is a very, very slippery slope. And this man, as far as I'm concerned, deserves the best, because he entertained us for so long. He deserves, as well as his wife, the best investigation that could possibly be conducted. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave Mack joining me as usual. Good to see you, my friend. Good to hang out with you.
How you doing, boss?
On a sunny afternoon. Beautiful blue skies, cobalt blue, as they say. Gentle breeze blowing outside. I had to go sit down for a while, Dave, because at the time of this recording, I have been on air now. I think I've done 14 separate hits now. I've got 2 more coming up on the topic of Gene Hackman. But before we get into the death investigation, I started out talking about Bonnie and Clyde. And first off, I hate anything that happens to show Bonnie and Clyde in a good light, because they were cop killers.
They were horrible. They were horrible robbers, and they just were murderers. That's all they were, both of them.
They were. They left a lot of widows and maybe a lot of orphans too. And as they say, there's a special place for those kinds of people, but Gene Hackman was part of that. But that was not my favorite movie. And I'm going to say something to you right now beforehand. I can tell you, you will probably not guess what my absolute favorite appearance that Gene Hackman ever had in a movie. You want to take a guess? Or do you want me just to go ahead and plainly? I love Royal Tenenbaums, a Wes Anderson movie. And Bill Murray is now going on and saying that Gene Hackman made life tough for a young director like Wes Anderson. And he said old actors, particularly really good ones, have very little patience for young directors. And those comments were, they were not meant in a bad way. They were actually complimentary, I think. And it goes to the person that Gene Hackman was. But my favorite of all time, because it's a complete surprise, is Young Frankenstein. Gene Hackman actually appears in that movie. You get the impression, he's a monk living by himself, and he is blind. And of course, the monster shows up. the reason I like that role so much, and I don't know, Dave, what's your estimation? He may have been on film maybe 4 minutes, if that long, in that one little role. And Peter Boyle, who's playing Frankenstein's monster, it's the two of them are absolutely hilarious. He's making stew for him. Of course, I think it gets dumped in his lap, the monster's lap. He offers drink. And of course, the cigar scene is just absolutely hilarious. And, you know, as the monster's storming out of the house, I think he says, "I'll make you an espresso." And it was so funny. Or maybe it was a cappuccino. I can't remember. But the reason I like that is that unlike a lot of actors, Gene Hackman was not one-dimensional at all. He could do comedy. He could do hard-edge drama. He is something that only comes around, I think, once in a generation. I don't know that anybody, as far as being versatile, could compare to him. And finally, Dave, you know, he said, it was an interview that he gave in the mid-2010s where he said, I had to walk away. He said, my heart couldn't take it anymore.
Well, he started writing too. You know, he's an author and a published author at that. And he had really started hitting his stride doing that after he was 75. He just started, 20 years ago, he just decided, time for something different. But I've got a piece of trivia about Gene Hackman I bet you don't know.
I probably don't.
He was the original choice to play Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch. And he was beaten out by he was beaten out by Robert Reed because Robert Reed had a higher TV cue because he had spent 4 years playing the Defenders. Remember where
yes, I do.
The father and his son have their anyway, and so Robert Reed was under contract at the studio, and they decided to go with him as the father of the Brady Bunch, and of course that was. Gene Hackman gets the breakout role in Bonnie and Clyde, but it still took time before the French Connection rolls around. There's 8 years between one and the other, or 7 years. Yeah. Anyway, Gene Hackman, we could do an entire show just talking about his career. He was much more than just an actor, very an interesting fellow, but he's kind of like that guy, you see people in movies and you think you get an idea of what they must be like, but we have no idea. We only see them in a part that they're playing that may or may not have anything to do with them. A good actor embodies the part. It's like there are no small parts, only small actors kind of thing. And he was brilliant, brilliant.
I had to go back and watch a clip. I have to confess to you, I hate to say addiction. That's an insult to people that are addicted to things, but I had a tendency for many years to go back and watch clips from inside the actor's studio. And when he's sitting there in the chair and he's talking to Lipton, he always starts the beginning of these things by saying, "Tell us about your childhood," and Gene Hackman related a story to Lipton at that time. And he started crying, which is something you don't see Gene Hackman do. And he had to ask the audience for a pause and beg forgiveness at that point in time. He told the story, and he was very young. I hate to say, I think he was 8. And his dad abandoned him and his mother. And he says, Lipton said, I have insight into what actually happened. He said, "First off, tell me, how did that affect you?" And he said, "Badly." And he said, "Was life tough?" And I'm thinking, that's kind of a ridiculous question. Gene Hackman was like, "Yeah, it was very tough. It was just me and my mother." And he said, "Tell us about the story of your dad leaving. It's kind of an odd story." And Gene Hackman said, "I was playing down the street with a group of guys." And he said, and just listen to this, Dave. He says, "I looked up, my dad merely drives by in the car, lifts his hand and waves." And that was his dad saying goodbye. And, it kind of set him on a course. And let me tell you one more thing, if you like that one. It set him on a course to where in 1948, I think, or 47, Gene Hackman lied about his age and enlisted in the Marine Corps at 16 and spent time in China. This is post-war, so he's part of an occupational force. He did Okinawa. I think he was in Japan. He did Hawaii too, which wouldn't be too bad. But can you imagine being in war-torn Japan during that period of time, and you're like 17 years old? And I know there are a lot of that generation did that, but he was from a different cut of the cloth, Dave. He really was.
Well, you think about his dad leaving it when he's only 8. That's 1938, and you're at the second highest round of the worst of times with regard to the Great Depression. There were 3 different peaks where it was really bad. 1938 was really horrible for millions of Americans. And so anyway, I think that it informed his work. I think it's why he was so versatile. I think Robert Duvall, the same thing. The reason these actors can embody so many different things is they experienced so many different things as young people in growing up in America. And losing Gene Hackman the way we did, he's 95 years old. And according to his family, he was in good health for a 95-year-old man.
Yeah.
That he was doing yoga a couple of times a week. He was doing Pilates. He was doing things that are good for they're not hard workout things. They're good for moving and stretching and, blood flow stuff. And that's what we're told. Now, it's so funny that he was able to walk away from a very successful career, not at the height, but, his career, once it took off, and he was constantly in demand and worked whenever he wanted and, amassed a fortune. The house in Sante Fe was worth $3.8 million. Sante Fe is a wonderful place to live. If you've never been there, I encourage you to take a trip to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sante Fe is 58 miles to the north. It's just an incredible place to go. And so,
I would love to see it. And this is why I understand Cormac McCarthy actually lived there as well as other artists. And it was kind of a draw. I think there's always been this kind of artsy, you think about Taos or whatever it's called. And, and you had people,
Taos. You're right.
Yeah. And a lot of artsy people up there, but Sante Fe, he was drawn there, I think, obviously for the writing. Can you imagine being around Cormac McCarthy? And I'm sure he had some kind of contact with him. And I think he was also a painter too. But just to free yourself of Hollywood, and that frenetic pace and everybody's pulling at you, it'd be kind of hard to, and this is before the days of, connectivity. You got to make an effort to make contact with him. And so he's there. He's got his beautiful wife. They were married for a long time. There's a big age gap between them, which I think plays into this story as well.
Listen, I've got a lot of questions for you about that too. Just not their age gap, but the difference in the way they were found. This is a story, Joe, that has a lot of twists and turns, and the fact that you've done 14 network television shows about Gene Hackman's story, it is because he was such a respected actor and artist. His wife, concert pianist, she's a respected artist, and nobody had anything bad to say about their relationship or their marriage or anything else. You don't hear anybody say anything like that. No. And, lo and behold, they both wind up dead, and we don't even know for how long yet, right?
Yeah, we don't. And I have to admit, my wife, Kimmy, has actually stated to me in the past, we've watched everything that Hackman has done over the years. And she said, and I didn't know if I was supposed to be jealous of this or not. She said, there's a sexiness about him because and maybe it's a female thing, thinking about, you felt like that because he seemed like a real world guy, and you felt like if there was a problem, your boy's going to solve it. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't flighty in any way. You felt like that even if he stepped off of the set and he encountered a problem, he's going to meet it head on. And that's why I think it was last year we saw that first image of him where he's leaving a store with Betsy, his wife, Arakawa, and he's got a cup of coffee in his hand. And it was so kind of regular, real world kind of thing. And Dave, he's walking with a cane, and he's actually suffering, just looking at him, from a condition called kyphosis, which is when you see someone that it's more profound than like a dowager's hump, where you're kind of slumped over. This is something that develops with age, and he's walking along with a cane, and he's not Gene Hackman like you remember him. As a matter of fact, we had to do a double take and say, that's Gene Hackman.
Yeah, it's an old man.
And,
It's a
you can see the eyes beyond that. And look, I'm going to wind up, if I'm blessed to live long enough, I'm going to wind up in that state. It's not something different, but, the body can tell you a lot just by presentation of people walking along. I'm not going to say he's like infirm, but that he would need assistance, because even in that image, he's holding the cane in his right hand, and he's holding onto the crook of Betsy's right arm with his left hand, and he needed to be steadied as he's walking along. And that was a profound moment, because it's a long way from that image that I've seen of Gene Hackman with his buzz cut back in the 40s as he stares into the camera, a freshly minted Marine. But you know what? There will never be an actor that will measure up to the legacy that this man has left behind. Dave, we cover a lot of cases. You and I, I look back and I think about the road that you and I have traveled thus far. We're up to we're right at about 350 episodes of Body Bags. Just let that sink in for a moment. And we have covered a lot of brutal deaths. We've covered a lot of brutal perpetrators. That's an understatement, I think. Where I don't have a lot of patience with the media is when they start throwing around terms like questionable, suspicious, something that is sinister. But I'm going to admonish the police here for a second. It's not something I normally do. During a presser and press release, there has been the term suspicious that has been put out there. Now, listen, I'm not saying that these are not odd circumstances, because they truly are. However, when you say suspicious, you're implying that something very dark may have happened. And at this point in time, I don't necessarily know that there has been, but my God, this has created a frenzy that I could not have even begun to anticipate along the way. With just everything that's in the news, how many times I've been contacted. I've had, just since we've been sitting here, I've had 2 text messages come across.
Everybody loves Joe, man. You know how I explain you to people, well, what is Joe Scott really like? I said, look, he's a professor. He is an expert at so many different things, but all you got to do is watch network television covering crime. He's on there. He's on every show talking about everything, because he's the guy. And I said, so when you think about Joseph Scott Morgan, when you talk about Gene Hackman, okay, and we've got a lot to cover here, even though we still don't know what they actually died from, we have a lot of information about the condition of the bodies. Yeah, and the reason it is suspicious, Joe, and I take great exception with the media making things salacious. It bothers me. Yeah. I know why we do it. I'm not good at it, and I don't like it. And no. The reason I'm not good at it is because I don't like it. I know that you lead with, if it bleeds, it leads. I got you. But in this particular case, you've got a 95-year-old man, and you've got his wife is 64, right?
Yes.
I think and now think about this. If they're both 95 and they are found dead in the home like this, right? There's not going to be a whole lot of, they'll be digging around, but it won't be suspicious, because they're both in advanced years and they both passed away. However, you've got an age difference here of 31 years. And that's why, why is it that I get a 95-year-old man dying in his house? I get that. But his 64-year-old wife dies at the same time? In a different part of the house?
Yeah, no.
With pills all over the cabinet? All over the countertop. And a German Shepherd dog. Of 3 dogs, you've got one dead in the house, another one alive in the house, and one outside the house.
Yeah, the one that was alive in the house was, according to what I've heard thus far, was actually adjacent to Betsy's remains, like sitting there almost watching over her. And, that goes to the heart of a dog. That's why I love dogs so much, because they love us unconditionally, period.
Hank,
End of
my dog
story.
Hank is still depressed, Joe. After what we went through a couple of weeks ago, Joe.
Right.
Hank is not. He has not gotten over it, and it is watching a dog grieve. Is really something.
And it's real too. It's not something that you just pay homage to and say, yeah, well, that happens. No, it does in fact happen. And you sit there and you think about this. How long had that dog been adjacent to her and walking around and sniffing and doing all the things that they do to try to nudge their master who takes care of them day in and day out? And I will kind of comment on this. The one dog that was deceased, we've heard them say, well, the dog was in a closet 10 to 15 feet away from Betsy. Yeah, the dog may have been in a closet, but the dog was also, according to reports, was in a pet carrier or a pet cage rather. And so that death is kind of easily explained because and I'll go ahead and kind of give this away. I'm sure people are aware of this. They've talked a lot about decomposition and specifically mummification, which we'll get to.
Hold on a second. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and complete your thought. But I wanted to back up to that because I'm really not understanding the conditions. Right. But so the dog was in the German Shepherd in the closet was in a carrier.
That's what has been being alleged, and there's a lot of stuff that's floating around out there at this point in time, and I'm hoping that we'll get a firmer handle on that. But I'll go ahead and throw this little nugget out to you. If that dog was in a carrier or a cage or however you want to say it, that animal didn't have access to water, and dehydration is one of the quickest ways for whether it's people or dogs to die. You're absent water for 2 to 3 days. And buddy, let me tell you something. It's all over but crying at that point in time. The other dogs one was outside, and you had the other one that was still on the inside of the house. So that little bit to me, if that is accurate, kind of explains something relative to time. You begin to think about, how long does it take a human? I can't necessarily comment on a canine, but these are big dogs. These are German Shepherds. Apparently, Gene had a real affectation for German Shepherds, and he loved them. There's several pictures of him out there, with a huge grin on his face and, a beautiful face, that German Shepherd, just kind of hanging onto him. And, you think about the status of the remains in the house, and their location, because that's been a big bone of contention in the last 36 hours, the position of the remains, and the status of the house. I'm still amazed right now. When the first reports came out, they said that there was evidence of forced entry. Well, that appears to not be true. Let me repeat that. That appears to not be true. It's inaccurate. The front door was open. Now, some have said that it was unlocked. Other people say that it was open. And there may have been other open doors. But again, we can't validate that. But it plays an important part here. When you have the two masters that are essentially deceased, you've got these other dogs that are wandering about, and in these different locations, because Betsy's on the floor of the bathroom, from what we understand, lying on her side. There is an adjacent pill bottle that is opened, and pills scattered about on the counter. We don't know what the medication was. That might play into this. And then Gene is down the hall in the mudroom, is what they're referring to this as.
What is a mudroom?
Yeah, a mudroom, for people that are not familiar with it. All my friends up north, they use the term mudroom. I'd never heard it necessarily down here in the South, but it's a place, generally a rear entrance, where you make your way into the house. Many times the laundry room will be back there, and it'll be all contained. And it's where you can be dirty. You walk in and you take your galoshes off or your shoes, and you put them in there. You hang your raincoat up or your other accoutrement, and you don't track it into the house, hence the term mudroom. Well, when they observed Gene Hackman's remains, he's lying on the floor and he's clad in a pair of gray sweatpants. He's got a dark blue long sleeve T-shirt on. And again, back to the cane. The cane is lying adjacent to him, along with his brown leather slippers. They didn't really say if they were on his feet or not, but here's another piece to this. He had his sunglasses lying there, Dave. And assuming that there is a door, which you would imagine there would be in the mudroom, big question is, was he trying to exit the house for some reason that we don't know at this point in time? That the police at the scene said that they didn't see any overt signs of trauma. But one of the things you're having to kind of fight with here is the fact that, and I don't know if there were actual medical legal personnel there. I hope that there were from the state medical examiner. New Mexico is one of the states that does not have a coroner. As a matter of fact, I've used the term superlative. They have a superlative state medical examiner's office that is run, thankfully, by the state health department, not the state police. So they have a real vested interest in all manners of death. And, that's the way I like to roll. And they're actually affiliated with the university there, with the medical school. So they're right on the cutting edge. And this is not something new. They've been that way for a long time. I hope that one of those individuals were there to assess the remains, because, Dave, one of the biggest problems with this is going to be something that we've talked about for a long, long time here on Body Bags, and that's PMI, the postmortem interval here, because you're trying to nail down a time. That's the big question that a lot of people have beyond the suspicious stuff. We have to kind of try to understand how long they had been dead. And the other big mystery that has been pushed forward is, did they die at the same time? And that's, I think that goes to the heart of the matter, Dave.
That's been my question since we started, and I pointed it out earlier. If they were both 95, probably would not get the suspicious angle in it. But it's the fact you have a 95-year-old man and a 64-year-old woman. Granted, I mean, again, I hate saying that. It's not the age difference. It is the age difference.
Yes.
It is because there is such a big difference in their ages. A 95-year-old man falling, having a heart attack, something happens and he dies, not uncommon. But to simultaneously have a 64-year-old woman in a different part of the house, not even in the same part of the house. And that's, again, it just looked like something happened quickly, because you mentioned his glasses and cane and sunglasses are right there. He's in the mudroom, probably.
Yes.
Well, no, either coming in from having been somewhere or getting ready to leave to go somewhere. She's in a restroom where she is taking medication at whatever time something befalls her, because the pills are scattered on the countertop. And you also, that's just a unique situation. Two people of such diverse ages having this situation happen. You have to assume, no, you don't have to assume anything. I assume since they were in drastically different parts of the home, that whatever hit them both at the same time.
Yeah, that is the assumption here. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. People make fun of that. But, that's why this idea of determining the time since death, both individually, and then assessing that and comparing it. Do the two processes look like they're head to head or are running neck and neck? That's a better analogy. And if not, then it gives us potentially a bit of information. Let's say that Betsy is in more of an advanced state of decomposition. The term mummification has been used relative to her hands and her feet. And I'll go ahead and be very blunt. Even the search warrant, and anybody can see the search warrants out there, says that her face was bloated, which is consistent with decompositional changes. So if she is in a more advanced, just follow my logic here. If she is in a more advanced state of decomposition than Mr. Hackman was, the question is this, and this goes back to what I talked about, the kyphosis earlier, where he's dependent upon her. He's having to use her to steady himself and to walk about. If that's the case, Was she having some type of medical event, Dave, where she entered the bathroom trying to get to her meds? Now, I don't know. I have no idea what these meds are, but let me throw one out to you in particular. Let's say it's nitroglycerin. Okay. Take a tab. You're having angina. Put it beneath your tongue. The problem here is at this point in time, we don't know anything about Miss Arakawa's medical history. But if she's on some type of medication she is dependent upon day in and day out to help her along, and she collapses in the bathroom and passes away, one of the more sinister things about this is that if Gene, who might be totally dependent upon her, remember, they haven't been seen for a while. No one's been checking in on them. They don't necessarily have a caretaker there. If she's been dead for a while, Dave, sadly, he could have wandered about the house for a while, searching for the spouse who he loved and had been committed to for over 30 years, that they'd built a life there in Sante Fe. And in one desperate attempt, he's trying to go for help. He's got his sunglasses. He's got his cane. He's got his T-shirt. He's got sweatpants on. And then he couldn't take another step, and he collapses in that mudroom. I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but I do know this. Right now, at this stage at least, we probably have more questions than we do answers. But as I always say on body bags, the truth is always going to be told. And generally, the key to the truth in our world is science. All right, Brother Dave, go ahead and hit me. I know what you're going to come at me with. Let's talk about mummification, because it keeps coming up in conversation time and time again. And I don't mind addressing it, but go ahead.
I'm glad, because that is the first thing. You know, we are going to look at, you were just laying out a plan of maybe an explanation of what happened, that she had a medical emergency and he couldn't help her. My first thing is, well, why didn't he pick up the phone and call? Again, maybe that's not something he was able to do with his fingers and things like that. I don't know what his, 95 years old, that's, some are better off than others, in terms of being able to use their fingers. That's why they got the jitterbug phone, Oh, yeah. I mean, there are things that happen as you get older that make it tough. I don't know. Maybe he didn't use it. I don't know what his situation was. So thinking of wondering, how are they going to determine? You're the guy, and you've just found out that we've got two people separated in age by 31 years that have been together since 1991. They don't appear to have any signs of physical violence done to either one of them. But Joe, looking at the search warrant, and maybe we need to come back to this, but I'm kind of curious about a number of things that they're looking at. When police put together a search warrant, it means they have to present enough of the case before a judge who says, yes, you can go in and look for these things. They have to be specific. Sometimes they have to explain why. In a very gray area here, but the bottom line is you have two dead individuals. Searching that home is not going to be that difficult, because they got to find answers. But still, because we are a society that we have a right to the government not coming in and going on a fishing expedition, whether you're dead or not. And that's what the search warrant is for, is because they're not allowed to come into your home unless you say yes. And
well, this is where the utility of the word suspicion comes in. I'm so glad you talked about the warrant relative to a judge signing or a magistrate signing off on this thing. Words are very powerful. My wife always says words are containers of power, and they are. The things that you speak that come out of your mouth, and they influence people. And when you're writing up a search warrant, if you throw out that term suspicious, and particularly when you given the level of notoriety, and look, you've been in the media business a lot longer than I have, brother. You know that if a celebrity dies, those lights get a little bit hotter, It gets white hot. And, I can even remember when Bob Saget died. My Lord, calls came in, relative to that. Even back to Philip Seymour Hoffman. It went on and on and on.
That one broke my heart.
Yeah, it did. It did mine as well. Talk about a great actor. And, I'm not going to go down that road.
Addiction does not care about your fame, fortune, or anything else. Addiction kills.
It does not discriminate at all. But yeah, they had a couple of things. One of the biggest things I think that really kind of hit home relative to their suspicions or what they thought was the thing that raised its head first was carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, I have had cases of carbon monoxide poisoning. I think that I've mentioned it before, but it bears stating again. I have had cases where an entire family, and I'm talking about 6 family members, were completely and totally wiped out in one night from breathing in carbon monoxide. And Dave, it's so lethal that it absolutely, how can I say this? It absolutely kills you. I'm not going to say instantaneously, but all of those people never woke up. They were in their beds.
Joe, when you talk about a family not waking up, a number of people, we've had issues of carbon monoxide happening and stories like that. They're just sad, especially with portable heaters or generators during times of electrical outages. It's a fairly normal, a common occurrence. But
yes,
in this case, right away, they had the fire department chief saying, we didn't find anything. We've got New Mexico Gas and Light. They're saying we didn't find anything. They've already looked. They've checked pipes. They've checked for leaks all around the house. It was Gene Hackman's daughter, Leslie Ann, who actually brought up the idea of carbon monoxide. And according to the Daily Mail, she was smiling when she did it. And I'm going to tell you, when you're talking, when you're trying to make a story be a bigger story, that's all you got to do from the media standpoint is, why is his daughter smiling, talking about carbon monoxide? And I thought that was fascinating that that's how they were pushing the story forward. But when you've got the fire department and the New Mexico, the officials involved in a gas leak issue saying, no, we couldn't find anything. Do we move on, or is there more to check?
No, yeah, there is more to check. I mean, it's valid. Now, I don't know about the daughter's response, but it's a valid ask, if you will, because I don't know if people appreciate how rare it is where you have 2 individuals inside of a structure. Not if you count the canine, that's a third, that just spontaneously die. Out of all the cases I've worked over the course of my career, if I have multiple deaths in one single structure, this is how it rolls. It's either some kind of trauma-related event that can be shooting, stabbing, beating, fire, any number of things. Okay, a storm. All right. You have the toxicity in the air. Are they breathing in something that's going to kill them, or is there something internal that has been ingested at that point in time? You and I have covered poisoning cases where, we've got multiple people that die as a result of it, but they have to explore that, and they will. And at the ME's office, I'll bet you dollars to donuts, they're going to draw blood on both, and they're going to run a test called a carboxyhemoglobin level, and it gives you the measure of, first off, of carbon monoxide, because the environment that we live in, you're always around carbon monoxide. You don't see it, but if you're walking down the street, if you live in a big city, for instance, and you got a lot of car exhaust, there's going to be carbon monoxide. If you're out on farmland somewhere, unless you're standing next to a tractor, you're not going to have that much, but it's there. All right. So there's a given amount, and then you have the toxic amount. So they will draw the blood if they're able to, because we're talking about individuals that are they're down the road a little bit relative to decomposition, and that can kind of make things more difficult. But there's also things that we look for physically with carbon monoxide, and I don't know that they saw this at the scene. Did you know that with carbon monoxide asphyxiation, your skin turns pink. It's cherry red. I mean, it's like, imagine the most brilliant colored popsicle you've ever seen with artificial coloring and all that stuff. And it's striking when you see it. And not only that, the eyes, the sclera, they're no longer white. They turn pink as well. And even when you open the body, the organs are pink. When you draw the blood is pink. Yeah, it's that striking. And a lot of that is dependent upon how much you uptake. Okay. So there are physical findings you can have in addition to the chemistry that goes into analyzing the sample. If they're absent that, then I'm hoping, and I'm sure that they will, they're going to do like a broad spectrum drug panel and we do one anyway. We call it standard panel, and it covers all the major drugs of abuse. Okay. That's just, everybody gets that. If you go to the morgue, you get your blood drawn, urine drawn, bile, vitreous, it's all going to be tested. All right. But here's the key. We do know that there's a vial of medication there. Hopefully that was collected and taken into the OCME, and they're going to analyze the medication. Now, if you have the vial, it has a label on it. One of the big keys here to unlocking this mystery are the attending physicians. How long has it been since they were seen in the office of an attending physician? What did that individual see when they examined? What's the history? Because the ME will go back to these individuals that have been doing the treating. I'm assuming that 95 years old, there's a high probability that Mr. Hackman has an attending. All right. Now, I don't know what they're expecting, maybe internal, maybe gerontology. I have no idea. But they'll have a list of medications. They're also going to know what kind of heart history they've had. Is there a history of stroke? There's a lot of stuff that hasn't been revealed, relative to that. Now, the complexity of this is further exacerbated, as I've kind of already mentioned, relative to decompositional changes. If you're looking at the bodies externally, first off, the examination at the scene doesn't even compare to what you're going to do at the morgue because you can't see. You're in a mud room, the lighting, the clothing is still in the body. You're not going to undress a body at the scene. I don't care what you say. It's not good practice. You're going to do an initial observation of the body. You're going to check for decompositional changes, level of rigor mortis and livor and algor and all those things that we check for. But you're not going to disrobe a body at the scene. Body will go in to the morgue intact. And I can guarantee you, particularly given the high-profile nature of this case, they're going to do full-body x-rays, stem to stern. I mean, top of the head, soles of the feet. They're going to do an extensive external examination, both clothed and unclothed. And then when you go to do the internal examination, that'll be very thorough. As a matter of fact, this case has such a level of intensity to it. I can almost imagine, Dave, that there will be more than one pathologist there observing. It's not going to be like a standard forensic pathology thing. And even if they're not physically there, the primary pathologist or prosectors are referred to, they're going to be consulting. They're going to say, well, what do you think about this? This is what because anything that they say that issues forth from that font of knowledge, if you will, is going to be analyzed for years and years to come. Anybody that's wearing a tinfoil hat in mom's basement is going to say, well, what about, there was even an article, and I'll go ahead and say it plainly. It's kind of disgusting. An article that came out today, and Randy Quaid, of all people, is quoted as saying that because Gene Hackman, what was the quote? It was like, because Gene Hackman had the highest residuals in Hollywood, that something nefarious has happened. I'm thinking,
just FYI, I like Randy Quaid as an actor. He's brilliant, but he has really gone off the deep end of conspiracies and government and everything else. And I encourage you to look at what his life has been like over the last 30 years.
Exactly.
And defrauding the innkeeper comes to mind, but and hiding out in Canada and being anyway. But let me get back to something.
But one more thing about that, and I'll go on. But the problem with that is that when someone in that status makes a comment like that, it just further, exacerbates any existing problems that you might have. Now you've got everyone in the world that's holding forth on this and saying that it's something, really, really sinister. And I keep using that term, but I don't know how much you have to take everything into consideration, Dave, in a case like this, and cover all of your P's and Q's. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to step on you.
No, buddy, I think I get so frustrated with Randy Quaid and other actors like that because, it's like I think about their career and you've got to realize that they're people too. And we all have a crazy uncle that went off the reservation. We've all got that in our life, and that's what he became. But to back up, I don't know him. I don't know Randy Quaid, but I know that he has comments about conspiracies a lot of the time. And I don't know what Gene Hackman's residuals. I don't know what kind of money he has, but you know what? There's a lot of rich people in Hollywood. There's a lot of rich actors. And he retired, and for the last 20 years has been his own guy, writing books, doing and just living his life in Sante Fe, New Mexico. But here's my question for you, Joe. We have two people that died in the same house, but they weren't in a fight. Usually when we have a married couple that dies, there's a fight that broke out. There's knife wounds, gun wounds, and things like that. We don't have that. But what we do have is an odd term of what they found on the scene. We're not talking about back at the medical examiner's office. We're talking about mummification being used as a term by people who saw them. And all I'm thinking of, sadly, because I'm an idiot, I think of mummies, and that I'm thinking, did somebody watch Young Frankenstein Part 2 that we all missed about the mummy? Because why are they talking about mummification if the hands and you got a bloating of the head? They talked about that with regard to Betsy Arakawa, but they don't mention that about Gene Hackman. They do mention the mummification of the hands, and they talked about being in a high desert, the altitude, the dry, the lack of humidity. And I get it; those things do come into play, I guess.
And you're right on target with that, Dave. Because here's the thing: is in Santa Fe, even though we're not so familiar with it down here in the South because we're so humid down here. Out there, you are in high desert; it's very arid, and there's there is very little moisture in the air. Plus, we're still at this point, we're in the winter months, okay? And that even makes it drier. Now, I know people are going to say, well, there's a snowstorm that blew through there. Yeah, there's a snowstorm that blew through there, but it doesn't mean that it's not dry, and it is dry. And so when this happens, this idea of mummification, I don't necessarily, I've never really liked that term because it will. And I've had news people that have said, does this mean like ancient Egypt? It's like, no, those are mummies that have been prepared and wrapped in cloth and everything that the ancients did. And they did it down in, Central America and South America. It's nothing new under the sun. I like the term desiccation more. And you generally hear that with dehydrated food, and that's precisely what this means, is that it's absent any kind of water. And so that water that is contained, that moisture in our human remains that's there in a climate like this is going to be drawn off pretty quickly. And so you'll get, the way I like to describe it is hands and feet, the most distal areas. That means the most distant anatomical points away from the core of the body, they go first, okay? And so to give you an idea as to what it looks like, imagine, if you will, newspaper that you find up in a closet that you've not had your hands on for years and years. Maybe it's 40 years old. It looks brittle. It's desiccated. It's dry. As a matter of fact, it's no longer brilliant white. It's gone from yellow to brown. And you'll see that manifested on human remains that are, in fact, dried out. And you can go out there, and it's kind of interesting. You can go out there, and if out in the open, if you have not had problems with animal scavenging, you can see bodies that are truly desiccated out there many times where there will still be visible tissue. Whereas if those same people had died like in the deep South, you wouldn't see that. You'd have this massive bloating that goes on. The skin is going to change and marble and do all those things. And the soft tissue is going to be gone, after a period of time. It's a different, like you stated earlier, Sante Fe is very beautiful. I would love to go there. I've seen images of it. However, I do know what Arizona is like, what Colorado and Utah are like. I would love to go and see it, but there's also a change in the environment. When you get in West Texas and you get into New Mexico, it's a different world out there relative to the environmental influences that are with the body. Here's another thing too. If these doors, and I've heard the plural, I've heard them say doors as well that were open. Well, does open mean unlocked or does open mean open? Okay, so now you're not necessarily dealing with a climate-controlled and artificially climate-controlled, so that's going to be an influence as well. But they haven't really come forth with more data at this point in time. I do know that The Guardian right now is reporting that the first autopsy has been completed and they haven't seen any kind of external trauma or anything that's really, giving them pause at that point. So I can tell you what's going to happen at this point, Brother Dave. We're going to be waiting. We're going to be waiting. It's the old line about pending further testing. And
we don't even have toxicology yet,
Yeah, you're not. And it would take and I can't imagine them releasing a definitive cause of death unless there's some kind of obvious trauma, which the Guardian is saying there's not, but that's the Guardian. I have no idea. You're going to have to wait until the drug chemistries come back. What's going on, is there anything in the toxicological sample that is giving you pause? Are there any medications on board that are in a toxic level? Okay. So that's what we're going to be waiting on. The other thing that we're probably going to be waiting on as well, let's just say either one of them had a heart attack or a stroke. Well, you can observe that, what we refer to grossly, that is looking at the organ itself, whether it's the heart or the brain, the lungs as well. You might have pulmonary embolus or something like that. But they're going to wait for histology, which means they're going to take little bits of the tissue and then fix it, which they have to fix it and stain it. And they're going to put it on a slide, and then they're going to take a look at it microscopically. Because I can tell you this, I know this as sure as the sun's going to rise in the east in the morning. There is not a single forensic pathologist out there that is going to move forward without being very, very cautious, because the world is very unforgiving with the medical legal community. If you say something, you're the scientist, they expect it to be, from the burning bush, that it's rooted in truth. It's rooted in science. And of course, for us, relative to the passing of, again, one of the greatest actors of all time and his precious wife, Betsy, and their dog, you want to make sure that you're accurate because you get one shot at it. And we have to be patient. We can't run off and make wild suppositions. And time will tell, as well as the science. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.